So my name is Brian Laquerre, also known as BB Hayes. Been part of the drag community for 28 years now. Um, I guess that makes me one of the older drag queens, which is fine. It is what it is. It's always evolving. You always look for something new and you're trying to tweak yourself. It's been great. The community has totally supported me. The fact that they allowed me to do what I was having fun doing was a great thing. I was very involved doing drag shows at all the bars, working with a number of other talented performers. Also did a lot with the Enforcers back in the day of Union Street, our leather community. It was a leather group. So it was kind of like male drag
Okay.
in the sense of harnesses, leather chaps, things like that. So it was their leather group. And then as drag queen, we would do a lot of shows to help benefit them. We would work together, which was great. From there, the next biggest thing was probably the Imperial Court of Rhode Island, where I was crowned. I was Empress 1 of the Imperial Court of Rhode Island, but I was actually crowned Empress 3 of the Imperial Court of New England. So it was a little bit of a rocky start. The person who brought the court system into Rhode Island, Bridget Hoy, was not doing things according to the court council. So after my coronation, we were in Toronto, and that's when the Imperial Court Council took us aside and said that we needed to get the proper paperwork, become a 501c3, and start from that point forward being the Imperial Court of Rhode Island. So it was myself, Lee Daniels, Fitzgerald Hamelsbach, and Ralph Martino, who were the founders. We came back. Ralph was my emperor. We got all the paperwork that we needed. The following year, Lee Daniels became Empress 2 of Rhode Island. Fitzgerald was Emperor 2. We continued on that quest and doing what we needed to have everything by the books, with an accountant, making sure everything was very transparent, knowing what was going on, but doing what the Imperial Court Council needed us to do. Then the following year, Stephen Hartley was crowned Emperor 3, and it was really his year that we were more business-like, and he really was instrumental in doing that. And that year, between those 2 years, really put the foundation on the Imperial Court of Rhode Island. And then it just kind of ran from there. It was great doing fundraisers for a lot of smaller organizations back in the day. There were a lot of grassroots people trying to help people living with AIDS, and at that point, a lot of people didn't want to help that. So having fundraisers for like $500 here or $1,000 there really helped, because it would actually help people with their rent, with their medication, through these smaller organizations. Since then, it's all been brought under an umbrella of the AIDS Care Rhode Island, AIDS Care Ocean State, and AIDS Project Rhode Island. So still amazing organizations, still needed, even though AIDS doesn't seem to be as big today because it's quote-unquote manageable to a lot of younger people. But being of the generation where friends were dying left and right and realizing nothing was really being done quick enough, it still is a factor, and we still need to make sure it's supported because the drugs are very expensive, and people, I might have had good coming out experience, but other people may not. And then on top of that, if they end up getting AIDS and having to support themselves that way, it's good to have resources for them to reach out to. So the Imperial Court did a lot of great, still does. I think it's a little bit different now, just like bars are different now, aside from COVID. Prior to COVID, things in the community are kind of like changing a little bit, but it's still good to have organizations that people can become part of and feel that they're welcome and needed and do good things.
Can you talk about the bar scene a little bit and how it's evolved that you've seen throughout the years?
Trying to think. It was always a lot of smaller bars when I first started going out. Providence has been a great city to come out into because there were so many bars you could go to, and most of them were all in walking distance. It's a great way to see, obviously, all of your friends, get together. That was a meeting thing. Every Friday, Saturday night, you always were there. Other nights during the week, depending on what's going on. As the years went on, instead of like not so many dance clubs anymore, but just kind of bar atmosphere, which still is a great way to see people. Then, as things have kind of changed, where I don't know, it was more technical with, people doing things with apps and everything. So, I mean, the bars, it's like you kind of like touch base at one bar, then go to another bar. It wasn't kind of the same home base feeling all the time. But I do have to say, for me, it's always been a great thing going. When you go to the bars, you see the bartenders, you know them, you feel welcome. There's something very uplifting that you're part of something. So that's kind of good. Now with everything going on with whole COVID, it just scares me as far as what's going to happen with that. I mean, as much as the younger kids, I being older, but the younger, I say kids, but generation, the apps and everything is a great thing, and they keep in touch that way more so. But it's still, I looked forward to going to the bar, meeting my friends at the bar, and then from there going to another bar, meeting another group of friends. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with all of that. This is all kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's true. So what inspired you for BB Hayes?
So
how did that start?
That actually started not having anything to do with the drag community or with the gay community. Where I was working as a hairdresser, we were going to France for an international show, and they were having a Hollywood night for the big gala night dinner. And they encouraged everyone to dress as things. So myself and the two owners at the time, we were trying to figure out what to do. Didn't want to be too obvious of things. You knew there were going to be like a lot of Marilyn Monroe's, a lot of, iconic like that. So I kept saying to one of the girls that I used to have a collection of mannequins, and I had all vintage swimsuits for them because I would change them and everything at different times.
Cool.
Back to saying my parents put up with a lot because I did have a bunch of them when I was living at home. Then obviously when I had my own house I had more. And I said, one of you need to do Esther Williams. She was huge, icon, especially in Europe, but also here in the States. And I'm like, who's really going to do her, realistically? So you're not going to have 3 or 4 of them. And so I brought vintage swimsuits into the salon. Both of them tried it on, and they were just like, well, we don't know about it. I said, if you don't, jokingly, I said, neither one of you do it, I'm going to do it. And they were like, all right, fine. I'm like, holy crap, okay. So I contacted a friend of mine who did drag for years at Coffee's on 146 back in the day. Hasn't been there forever. And Bobby Brule. And asked him, okay, I need to do this. I mean, I know how to do makeup because I did makeup for, Real Girls. I was involved with the Miss America pageant, Miss Rhode Island for the Miss America. And I did brides and did stuff like that, but it was totally different. So he kind of gave me a number of pointers. We came up with, I had the swimsuit, the little headpiece, and I made a fountain that attached to the swimsuit that had different spindles to make it look like the fountain was actually working. So we actually get to France, do it, I end up winning first prize. So I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. When I got back home, I contacted Lee Daniels, who was doing shows a lot at Kings and Queens in Woonsocket at the time, and said, if you need, your next show, if you need help, I'm willing to do, either backup or just help you backstage or anything. And I have to say, Lee was gracious enough, but kind of funny, because he goes, okay, here's a show. We'll learn these spots for a group number. There were 2 group numbers. They always did 2 group numbers and then individual numbers. Learn these spots. If Jennifer Holliday is there, you're out, she's in, and you can do 2 regular spots. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I totally appreciate it. But come that night, Jennifer was there, and Jennifer Holliday was a drag queen that was fairly well known in the area. Unfortunately, passed away too soon. But Lee's like, take my spot, you're in the group numbers. So Lee really kind of took me under her wings, and I have to say people feared Lee in Providence. So everyone, I never had to deal with a lot of things because they knew that Lee was a good friend of mine. But Lee was a great performer, very well known, just a wonderful, big-hearted person. And from there, that's how my drag started. Prior to that, when I was telling him at that same time, really, I came back from France. A friend of mine, I was cutting his hair, Chris Harris, another one, unfortunately passed away way too soon, was actually looking for someone to fill in a spot at something he was doing downtown. He goes, you did drag, can you do a number? And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess so. So then he's like, well, I need a name and I can't use Esther Williams, so what are you going to do? I'm like, okay. At the time, I used to go to Mirabar on Allen's Avenue, and there was a whole group of us, and one of our friends always used to get drunk and gave us all nicknames, and my hair was bleach blonde at the time. He used to call me BB Gabor, right? So I was going to use that, but then I was going, I don't know. One of the owners of the salon I worked at, her grandmother was Ruby Hayes. And I'm like, oh, that's quite a fancy name.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, I don't know how she'd like it if I use actually Ruby Hayes. So I just put BB and, Hayes together, and that's kind of how it came up. And it stuck ever since. And since then, I was able to do one thing leading to another. And again, I totally appreciate the community for letting me be part of it and having me do it all these years. It's pretty amazing. You get to meet so many different people. I traveled a lot doing different things between the Imperial Court, also in New England. Aside from that, just doing drag shows in different areas like Connecticut and Massachusetts, and it's just been great. It really has been fun.
Very cool. So what was it like being Empress number 1?
To be honest with you, I look back at it and it's like not knowing what was expected, really. The Imperial Court, so prior to being Empress 1, I was inducted, myself and Ralph Martino were inducted into the Imperial Court of New England court system as Baron and Baroness. They were basically based out of Connecticut, so we were part of Rhode Island, and we were brought in as Baron and Baroness. And it wasn't until the next year where they wanted to expand it, and I ran for Empress and won. Of course, I ran unopposed, but you still have to get 50% plus 1. So I didn't know a lot about the Imperial Court system other than it raised money, and and Lee and I talked about it because we were doing shows, and it's like, well, we do shows and we're raising money anyhow, so this seems like a good organization as long as we can say where it's going. And that was one of the issues with Bridget and her money end of it, which is why the court council wanted us and took us aside and said, if you want to proceed with this, you need to take it over, get the paperwork, and be known as the Imperial Court of Rhode Island. The Imperial Court of New England basically dissolved after that, and it was pretty great at the time because all of the bars worked together. And I think that, again, the bars were so close, you could walk to one of the others, but they all worked intertwined, so we could go from one to the other and worked as a whole community. And I think that's the most I take out of the whole thing, especially back in the beginning, that I felt like I was part of the community. Then it just sort of got magnified when it became Empress, because now you sort of a little bit of a, I'm going to say figurehead, but at the same point I was just who I was. But now, as it progressed, realizing it really had a lot of impact, and we were able to raise a lot of money and help a lot of people. So for that, I'm thankful. And I got to wear pretty dresses and a lot of jewelry, although all the jewelry does come out of our own pockets. So it is very costly to do this, but it's a lot of fun. It really is.
So did you put on the first coronation? Or when did the coronation start?
Well, the coronation, so I was actually, it was a coronation even when I got crowned as Empress 3 of New England. But then after that, every year there's a coronation, and typically, again, you have to run. Sometimes there are opponents, sometimes there are multiple people running, sometimes it's a single person. But if it's one person, again, you have to get 50% plus 1 of the votes. So it is kind of, it hasn't happened where that's happened and they didn't win, so that's a good thing. Basically, it's usually at one of the ballrooms downtown Providence. We've used the Biltmore a number of times, but we've also done it at what was the Westin, the Holiday Inn back in the day, in at the Crossing. So mostly everywhere, but we tried to stay more downtown area. This way here when people come to travel, because it's sort of like a sorority across the country. So you go to other coronations, and a lot of people like to come to Providence because everything was so local. They could stay downtown, they could walk, they didn't have to worry about getting cabs or, Uber or Lyft now. Pretty much all the bars were within like a 4-5 block radius. So they all really like come here. So every year there is coronation. However, this year there wasn't due to COVID. So that got postponed.
Yeah. Is it usually, was it a 3-day event? Has
So
it been a 3-day forever?
it always was a 3-day. Now it's more of a 2-day, where it used to be a 3-day, being Thursday night would be the in-town show for the Imperial Court of Rhode Island. And that's when the stepping down Emperor and Empress would give out, certain awards or accolades for the year of people within the court who kind of rose to the occasion or, stood out. Friday night would be the out of town show. So when out of towners usually come in the day before, and we would do a show where they were able to perform. Usually, for the most part, we always tried to have it in one of the bars. Sometimes it would be at the hotel. It all depends what was happening. And then Saturday night would be the actual coronation. Sunday, there's a brunch afterwards, just to meet the new monarchs, because at the end of the night, basically, they get crowned, and literally, it's like, then they're making the rounds to the bars and stuff, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
How long has the Imperial Court been around, Rhode Island been around now?
Since 92, as far as Imperial Court of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Again, 3 years previous, it was in Connecticut, but in Rhode Island, like, I was Empress one in 92. So from that point forward, we started.
I'm trying to math and my brain's not working. So what Empress is now? The 20,
So,
30 something?
Nope, so I had it would have been Stephen's 25th anniversary walk, so it would have been 28, so we're into the 29th year now.
Awesome.
I have to count back that way, that's crazy. It is, it's kind of crazy to think that much time was going by. It's like anything else. Like, all of a sudden when you stop and think of the number, it's like, that's a lot of time.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to talk about?
No. Well, if you can't think of anything, but whatever you want.
Well, do you have any advice you would give younger LGBTQ people?
To me, the best advice is really to stay true to who you are and don't try and change, whether it be for your parents, for your friends, or for what you think you're supposed to do to fit in. It's always hard trying to fit in, and it may seem like there are cliques of people. And again, I'm going based on saying being out in the community as far as like the bars, or even organizations. When you become part of an organization, you're always going to see where certain people congregate together in their little cliques. But everyone was new at one point. So it's really just, basically be nice, be yourself, but just know that you are a person, you belong wherever you want to be. It's like, don't think that you can't. Don't think you can't do anything. Sometimes it might be tough, so you might want to reach out to someone just to find out if there's an easier avenue to do something. Let's say, whether it be, even if, for instance, drag, to do drag, or doing certain things that you might want to do, whether it be sewing, whether it be, woodwork, whether it be, construction or whatever. Just because you're gay doesn't mean you can't do anything. You can do anything you want, but it's good if you have an avenue to go through. I don't know. It's a great community, especially here in Providence. Again, I keep saying that, but it really is being small. I think being a smaller city, it's easier to find other people, but also just feel like you can fit in somewhere. In a bigger city, I feel like you would get lost. So, I don't know. Even compared to Boston, when we used to go up there and do a few shows or go to the bars, it was great. They were wonderful. But it seemed like everything was sort of like disconnected. Like they didn't really work together. And I'm like, well, still, Boston's like a great city. It's bigger than Providence, but it's not like Houston, or it's not like New York. So I never understood why the bars never really worked together. I think also because I was just so used to Providence, and all the bars worked together, got along. It was like a huge community.
That's true. Can you talk about like when you start doing drag, you were talking about having like a role model kind of thing, and I know there's different terminology for like your mother, your grandmother, and all that.
A lot of times, like, you end up with a drag mother, which is basically someone who will kind of take you under, show you the ropes, to help you get started. Because more so years ago, you didn't have things like YouTube, so you didn't have the internet to access a lot of things. So it was really searching out someone who's been doing it, who could actually give you the pointers, and whether it be for your makeup, for your wigs, even performance-wise, different things like that. Now, I think for the younger generations, it's pretty amazing. You have YouTube, you have the internet at your fingertips. It's like you want to find out how to do drag makeup. There are so many tutorials, and there are so many different looks of drag. I am enamored by a lot of the RuPaul drag girls because their makeup, to me, I've always referred to as paint for the back row. Traveling the circuit with the Imperial court system, myself and a lot of the Rhode Island girls were considered more quote-unquote fishy, being real. One of the drag queens, when I first started doing drag, she used to call me Fish Delish. She goes, oh, you're just too real, like you just want to be passable. But at the time, for me, I was working with Miss Rhode Island, going on to Miss America, and I would go down to Atlantic City to do her makeup and her hair. And when I saw all those girls basically trying to epitomize and be the best of what they think a female looks like and present themselves that way, which at the time, Cosmo cover was what they all wanted to look like. Big hair, big boobs, and, you know, heavy makeup for a real girl. So to me, that was what I strived more so to look like versus like the very heavily painted or very, you know, outrageous kind of drag, which I love. It's just not who I am. And a lot of the girls in Rhode Island the same way. They're way more, I'm gonna say real, not so heavy. There are a few that are, and again, I'm enamored by them because it's just, that is a whole art form on of its own. Like even traveling the circuit, like a couple of girls, especially from Midwest, that competed in like the Miss Gay America pageants and everything, and that's when they said, they're like, oh, we paint for the back row, we're not like you, we're not fishy like you. And I'm like, but your makeup is just like so amazing. But again, it's totally different. So there are so many different avenues to go to. But again, nowadays for the younger generation, you go on the internet and you can find out anything, and there are all these tutorials that break down how to do everything. So it's not like you have to necessarily search out one person to be your drag mother. But typically that is how it works. It's who you either ask for help and you start, you know, under their wing, or it could just be your drag sister that you start doing drag and you start going out with them. Since they have an in, we'll say, in the community or in the bars, and you just feel like you're a little more accepted. It is hard when you're first doing drag to walk in cold into a bar that either you don't know or that you don't know, you know, the other drag queens, because it can be a little territorial over the years, you know, depending where you're going. But you know what? I've always told myself the minute I leave my door, you're nothing more than a man in a dress. So just go out and have fun, and that's, you know, it all comes off when you come home. But it's all about having a good time. But, you know, searching someone out or going through the internet. Again, the internet's amazing these days for anything. You want to find out how to do anything, you just like Google it, and it's like, oh, okay.
Do you have any drag children?
I personally don't have drag children per se. I've helped a lot of drag queens, but it's never been where I've had one under my wing that I really helped. I would help certain aspects, like certain drag queens who were starting out, they wouldn't want to know a certain part of how to do something, or I'd help them with that, or with their wig, or with their clothing, but I never really had a drag daughter, which is kind of interesting, but I think I just helped like more people spread out more. And that's fine. I didn't have to be our children.
Right. Where do you get your wigs?
Different. Back in the day, I used to go to Boston. There's a place in South End I used to get a lot. They catered to a lot of the drag queens that worked at Jacques and everything. Nowadays, again, online, there are a number of companies that I work with through my salon, because I do a lot of things with people going through cancer treatments and try and help them out. So I do have companies that I deal with already, so I can just order through them. There are a few places in Providence, like Beauty Works or Two Brothers, that carry wigs on hand, so it's easy. You can just go there. Everything is pretty much easy locally that you can get something. But again, the internet, you can get anything.
Do you have a favorite show that sticks out in your mind, like a favorite performance?
That I have done?
Yeah.
You know what? There was one Pride performance that I did very early on, and it was at the State House steps. I just came down. I did two performances, but the one in particular was I used to do Annie Lennox, because at the time I had my hair bleached, so I could use my own hair, and I had angular, you know, features. So it was actually, I loved Annie Lennox, and it wasn't until backstage when I was changing at some point, someone turned around and said, when I took my wig off, they're like, oh my God, you look like Annie Lennox. And I'm like, oh, all right. So her video Y had come out, and it was this huge showgirl headdress and sequin gown, and performing that on the State House steps, starting at the top and then working all the way down. It was just pretty amazing. Like, I can remember at the end of it, and I had already done one performance on the lower level, but I was just like, wow, you know what? Like, performing actually on a property like this for Pride, and with a crowd of people. The crowd of people these days is crazy bigger than it was then, but even still, though, it was pretty amazing. That's always going to be, in my mind. It's great.
That's very cool. Yeah, I'm just recently learning how, like, the first Pride, you think, had, like, 80 to 100 people, and then people watching. And I'm just learning how it trickled down for a little while, and then started to build back up.
Yeah.
In my head, it just kind of built from the 80 to 100 people. But, yeah, it's interesting how, for a little while, there wasn't a lot of people.
Yeah, and then through the Imperial Court meeting, some older gay people who were actually part and founders of it in the very beginning, to hear them where it was like there was hardly anyone, and people throwing stuff at them. It's just kind of amazing. But over the years, seeing how it really has evolved and gotten bigger and bigger, and even prior to being a nighttime, it had gotten pretty big, and I think a lot of it was that they did a lot of outreach for Youth Pride and for the younger generation, having different organizations, support organizations at the festival. So this way here, families could come out during the day, if just to see what was going on, if they need to get support for their kids or for their teenagers. But when it turned into a nighttime parade, I just feel it took on a whole different feel to it. It just became bigger than anything. Which is pretty amazing. I've been lucky to be a judge over the years, for the past number of years for the parade, and just seeing not only the floats, but the people, like literally, like rows and rows of people standing there, just like watching the whole thing, is really kind of overwhelming, but in a good way. Yeah. It's good to see that there is that much support.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's all I have. Is there anything you want to say in closing? I don't know.
And no, I'm just hoping that things kind of get better with this whole COVID thing, where we can actually become a community again. That's what I miss the most, is just being able to call up friends or text friends and say, oh, let's meet down at, Stable, let's go to, Dark Lady, we'll start there and, make the rounds. Now it's just so different. I mean, yeah. I just fear that the community, not that the bars kept them together, because I know there are a lot of people that don't go out to the bars, which is why things like Options and Gay Pride is great, because it's sort of a bigger thing, although a lot of people had a feeling that becoming a nighttime parade was more bar oriented, because then people would go to the bars right after. But back in the day, when you had the afternoon parade and festival, and then things were going on at the bars like later, you had this gap of time that some people didn't come out afterwards for. Whereas like now, it just kind of flows into it. So I'm not saying the bars sustain the community, but the bars do help, especially back in the day, that's how you got together and communicated. Yeah. But even still, that's just knowing you can go someplace and just be yourself and not have to, think twice about it. Like, for the bars to reopen and get back to what they were, and now we have to go and sit in one little area.
Yeah. I think a lot of people take for granted, too, how much the bars financially support the community.
It's so true. And even over the years, working with the bars, how good they were to be able to give us either 100% of the door and or certain donations and keep whatever we were doing. I mean, yes, they're making money off the liquor end of it on that part, and I understand that, but mostly all the bars were so open-handed, saying like, sure, you need to do a show, or you go to any of the bar owners and say, we need to raise money for whatever, can we do a show here, can we do something, whether it be a show or some sort of fundraiser. And I have to say, all were always like, not a problem. And I understand a lot of people, or a certain portion of people, think bars are not in the best light for people to be, or that shouldn't be what it is. But it does sustain a community in the sense of making people, give them some place to go where you can congregate, but also just too financially, like you said, it's so true.
Yeah.
It's like I don't think people give it enough credit with, you know, some of these bar owners, theoretically they didn't have to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but it made them part of the community also.
Right. Yeah. No. Any group that I can think of, whether it be softball, like the LGBTQ softball league. There's the flag football league.
Yeah.
APRI, Pride. They support and financially help out
Yeah.
any group you can think of that's LGBT community related. you
Yeah.
know.
The community has gotten bigger in the sense of that too. It seems to have expanded within it. So, and that's good. You know, it's just all finding your part in it.